Hello there all, and welcome to a new offering of pain. Or, well, in this case, frustration, because today's movie is one that has always rubbed me the wrong way. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that I love the Godzilla franchise. It is my favorite franchise of all time and holds a very special place in the black obsidian chunk I call my heart. However, this doesn't mean it doesn't have its fair share of turds. And while I wouldn't call Tokyo S.O.S a turd, it certainly isn't very good, and I would call it the worst of the Millennium era of Godzilla film. Well, subjectively anyways. Objectively, in terms of overall the worst, Final Wars holds the title, but it's at least very entertaining. Tokyo S.O.S also doesn't have the luxury of being yet another sequel boot like Final Wars. It is the only film in this era to be a direct sequel to the previous film, and honestly, it doesn't even do a very good job of it. This will contain spoilers for this film and Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, so you have been warned. With that out of the way, let's get started. The film opens up with establishing the three monsters that will be fighting in this film. Kiru, who is being repaired after his fight with Godzilla last film, Godzilla, who is waking up after being heavily wounded by Kiru, and Mothra, who is heading to Japan. After the title sequence, we cut to the main character and one of the few good things about the film, Yoshi Chujo, who is spending time with his nephew and uncle. And right away, you may see a slight inconsistency. They've stopped calling this iteration of Mechagodzilla Kiru, which is a shame because I rather liked giving this very unique iteration of the mech his own unique name. Granted, this isn't a major flaw, but it is still a lack of continuity. The ground begins to shake as voices begin to fill the room.
Mr. Chujo? Mr. Chujo?
These are Mothra's twin fairies and translators. They want Godzilla's bones returned to the ocean because mankind shouldn't mess with the souls of the dead. And here we have our first major continuity flaw. It has been 5 years since Godzilla's bones were dug up from the ocean to build Kiru, and not once did these two ever show up. This is such a huge problem, apparently, that Mothra will declare war on humanity if Godzilla's bones aren't returned to the ocean. And when Yoshi rightfully points out why bring this up now, they use an appeal to emotion. However, they do offer Mothra to fight in Kiru's place, but as we'll soon find out, that is a very, very strict downgrade. So, we have a few problems with the retarded rationale of Mothra here. First off, saying that Kiru's construction was a mistake is quite honestly stupid. Kiru was built as Japan's and the world's defense against Godzilla after the standard anti-kaiju weaponry proved ineffective. So, they poured all their resources into building the ultimate anti-Godzilla weapon. What exactly was the mistake here? Just building it? Or is it the fact that they trapped the proverbial ghost in the machine? Well, Mothra, maybe if you offered up your services beforehand, they wouldn't have had to do this, you useless insect. You had the 4 years Kiru was being built, and a year since it last fought Godzilla. And only now, when the mech has already been built and fought, do you come in and basically put a gun to humanity's head. Please and kindly fuck off, you pathetic excuse for a moth. Come to think of it, why did you come to Uncle Grandpa? I mean, I get you know him from way back in the day, but wouldn't going to the Prime Minister make more sense? Finding the Prime Minister's office is probably easier than Uncle Grandpa's house in the mountains, plus he actually has the power to shut down the project. Uncle Grandpa is just some guy. I would like to say we aren't even 10 minutes in and we already have a major continuity flaw. And the dilemma is fabricated out of nothing essentially. I reiterate, half a decade, you celestial cunts. They leave behind a runestone with Mothra's symbol on it. Keep this in mind, I'm not done with it yet. We then cut to a meeting discussing Kiru's repairs. 37% of its body was damaged and the Absolute Zero cannon was destroyed, with repairs of it uncertain. Keep this in mind, I'm not done with it yet. They bring up an interesting idea that Godzilla is attracted by Kiru's bones. Unfortunately, nothing is really done with this, so we just move the hell on. The film then brings up several good points about Kiru. Not only is it Japan's only defense against Godzilla, but other Godzilla-level monsters. Given that both Mothra and War of the Gargantuas are in canon with this timeline, that makes sense. But don't worry, the film will do nothing with this. We then cut to Uncle Grandpa giving little boy a basic plot summary of the first Mothra movie and setting up a very, very stupid plot point for later on in the film. Akane and the others from the first film are heading to the US to learn better tactics in order to pilot Kiru. I mean, it's not the worst reason to get rid of characters in a sequel, but it still comes off as a bit forced. Akane managed to fight Godzilla to a stalemate and cause more damage to it since, well, the Heisei era Mechagodzilla. So while I can understand the logic behind it, I still find it to be kinda dumb. But that is subjective, folks. Make of it what you will. I will say, however, it is nice to see Akane finally being accepted given all the shit she went through in the previous film. However, they pretty much replaced her with new Akane here, but this time she's a take-no-nonsense independent whammon. And it turns out her and Yoshi used to work together. That sounds really interesting. I can't wait to get more on that. But their conversation is cut short by Douche, who catches a fly in midair right after Yoshi snipes at him.
But the way he treats his machines, it's a wonder there's anything left.
Yoshi decides to leave the party to visit Kiru before Akane enters, and they have a pretty decent character interaction.
I get the feeling that it doesn't want to fight Godzilla anymore. Maybe it's better if it stays that way. In disrepair.
No, I can't agree. I want to fix it, so it can fight another day.
Please take care of it.
We then cut to Uncle Grandpa talking with the Prime Minister. Wait, hold on. How? How does an average Joe just get a private meeting with the Prime Minister? This is like getting a one-on-one conversation with the President telling him we need to demilitarize. The Prime Minister looks at the back of the rune which says life must live within the time nature allows. Keep that in mind, I'm not done with it yet. Uncle Grandpa then compares Kiru with nuclear weapons, and you couldn't ham-fist your message even more, movie. First off, comparing Kiru with nuclear weapons is a very poor one considering the reason behind their construction. Nuclear weapons were built for the purposes of war, to use on our fellow man in our little petty squabbles. Kiru was built for the purposes of fighting Godzilla and other monsters to protect our fellow man, because even we have a right to survive. Now, if there was the question of, what if Kiru fell into the wrong hands? A machine that can rival Godzilla would be the ultimate weapon. Then scrapping Kiru after its purpose was fulfilled in killing Godzilla would make some sense. While the current Prime Minister might only use Kiru for its created purpose, who's to say his successor would consider using it for less than altruistic means? But this is never brought up and is portrayed as a very black and white issue without giving it the nuance it deserves. And it presents the scrapping Kiru side as correct. The Prime Minister states that he can't simply get rid of Kiru because he has a duty to his country to protect them from Godzilla, even if he agrees that building Kiru was a mistake. However, Uncle Grandpa says,
even if that defense brings disaster to those people you're trying to protect?
You mean the disaster Mothra will bring because she suddenly decided to care after half a decade? I can't imagine why the Prime Minister wouldn't trust Mothra even after she offered her protection. As if the film is self-aware, for a moment we cut to a giant dead turtle washed up on shore. Said turtle has apparently been seen before, and this one has been killed by Godzilla. I can't imagine why people would consider Kiru's existence justified. After Godzilla destroys a US submarine, we cut to a scene that I still can't believe was written. Not just for the continuity flaws, no, but the absolute asinine logic behind it compared to the situation at hand. You see, the Absolute Zero cannon can't be repaired because it requires a giant synthetic diamond, which is apparently too expensive. I am not making this up.
There's a budget limit, you know. How do you expect me to purchase a diamond that size, for God's sake?
I'm sorry, what? Since when was cost ever a problem? Remember this line from the previous film?
This is a national emergency, people. We'll find the money.
So why can't you find the money to replace the diamond? Surely this possibility was taken into account with the budget, right? How many trillions have you spent on the construction, maintenance, and repairs of Kiru? The scientist said he'll fix it tomorrow, implying that with the proper materials it would be an easy fix. So, why not find the money to get it replaced? And if somehow it is too expensive, why not ask other countries for help? I'm certain they'd be willing to fork over the money to rebuild the weapon that has proven to heavily damage fucking Godzilla. The lack of the Absolute Zero cannon doesn't even come into play later on. They just replace it with a triple hypermazer. You know, those weapons that have proven ineffective against Godzilla in terms of dealing any kind of real damage. Remember how they made such a big deal about the Absolute Zero in the last film? It was the one weapon they were banking on to kill Godzilla. The missiles, railguns, masers, electrified blades were all just to soften him up before finishing him off, because it was the one weapon that could kill him. A weapon that would destroy its target at an atomic level. And because it costs too much to fix it, you replace it with an inferior weapon that has proven to be less effective. But even if we are to accept this retarded logic, was there no backup plan in case this very thing would happen? A cheaper but equally as effective weapon like, I don't know, repurposed maser technology that has the same power as the Absolute Zero cannon focused into a single beam of energy? This would allow for maximum penetration since all that power is being focused onto a smaller point. But no, it's too expensive and we're too stupid to think of a better backup plan. So Douche confronts Yoshi about Uncle Grandpa's visits to the Prime Minister's office. Apparently someone told him about it. I assume it's Douche's dad, considering he's a high-ranking member in the military, but I would assume that this is the kind of shit that would be confidential, but hey, writing's hard.
Maybe you're just scared of fighting Godzilla.
But he doesn't pilot Kiru. He's a mechanic. Dumbass. After getting tripped up by Douche, Yoshi visits with New Akane and we get a pretty good character exchange. She says that Yoshi only really cares about machines, which, given how he talked about the jet in the beginning of the film...
This F-1 is the first supersonic fighter made entirely in Japan. Look at it. What a fuselage.
Gives us a bit of insight into his character. He potentially cares more about machines than the people around him. And when New Akane says that he doesn't even think about women, implies she either had a thing for him and he just cared more about machines, or they were in a relationship but he was so into his work that he didn't really make time for her. It's something I wish the film would explore more. Godzilla finally shows up and Tokyo begins to evacuate. Defenses are set up, but it goes about as well as you'd expect. Now, what I'm about to describe is so completely retarded that if I didn't have visuals, you probably wouldn't believe me. So, little boy takes all the desks and chairs in his school and sets them up to form the fucking Mothra symbol. I repeat, this elementary school child decides to set up all the desks and chairs in his school so they form the Mothra symbol. And not only does this little bastard get it perfect, but it works. Did nobody think to try and get the small child out of danger and into the designated safe zones? And what child do you know could pull off a symbol like this, dead ass on point, and do it in an efficient amount of time? I've moved student desks out of rooms before, and it can take a while depending on how many there are. This would have taken hours just to get all of the desks out of the school, let alone set them up like this. And just to add to this mountain of tismery, apparently Mothra needs to be summoned to do what she was offering to do at the beginning of the film. You want humanity to trust you, yet your ass needs to be called before you do anything to help? Fuck off, you lazy insect. But it's a Godzilla movie, so it doesn't need to make sense. More on that later. And so Godzilla and Mothra do battle, and it's pretty much what you'd expect. Lots of flapping and flailing and staring, but there is a cool move where Mothra drags Godzilla and uses the momentum to send him skidding across the ground. It's pretty neat. Mothra then uses her reflective scales, which Uncle Grandpa points out is her last resort move and will render her unable to fly, thus killing her. I am not making this up.
Oh, look at that. Mothra must know it's going to die. Well, it's attacking with its scales. Mothra's weapon of last resort. Once it loses its scales, it won't be able to stay airborne for long.
Keep this in mind, I'm not done with it yet. We then cut to the fairies singing the Mothra song to Mothra's egg because, well, it's fucking Mothra. It'd be strange if they weren't. Speaking of, Mothra's scales reflect Godzilla's atomic breath right back in his face, and it does nothing but piss him off. And then she just keeps at it. Look, aside from reflecting energy attacks, what do these skills do? Give Godzilla a severe sneezing fit? Can you do anything even remotely competent, you waste of an exoskeleton? Thankfully, the Prime Minister orders Kiddo to be deployed. However, it is deployed to save Mothra. Yes, the weapon Mothra wants gone and is offering to replace needs to save her from the threat that Kiddo was built to deal with in the first place. Keep this in mind, I'm not done with it yet. Godzilla tries to blast Mothra with his atomic breath, but she dodges it and it hits Tokyo Tower, which falls onto some buildings and causes debris to fall into Uncle Grandpa and Little Boy. And hold on, Mothra and Godzilla began to fight at sunset. Uncle Grandpa and Little Boy left when it became dark, but managed to get far enough to not be in the blast radius when Mothra reflected Godzilla's atomic breath at him. This explosion wasn't small, by the way, it was at least several dozen city blocks. Let's not even bring up how a geriatric and a kid that isn't even close to puberty yet managed to get that far away in what I assume is a short period of time. They should be safe, but apparently Godzilla and Mothra can teleport where the plot needs them to be. So Kiddo and Godzilla finally engage, and I must admit the fight is pretty solid. Not as good as the last film, but better than I remember it being. However, Kiddo doesn't seem to have his piss-poor battery life anymore. Remember how it only had enough charge for 2 hours? Something that came into play during the last fight these two had? Apparently they fixed that off screen because it's never mentioned in the film. So the egg hatches and it's twins, just like in the original Godzilla vs. Mothra, which is a nice nod. But that isn't the only thing they take from that film, and we'll get to that nonsense soon enough. Yoshi is out searching for Uncle Grandpa and Little Boy, but is having a lot of trouble. But the Mothra rune begins to act as a compass. No, don't ask me how that works. The larvae begin to make their way to Japan as Yoshi finds Uncle Grandpa and Little Boy alive, and somehow not crushed under the thousands of pounds of rubble, but somehow knocked out. How long have they been there anyways, and how have they not been killed during the fight? Ugh! Stop looking for logic in a Godzilla movie, they're not supposed to make sense. Kiddo gets knocked out by a pretty clever move by Godzilla while the twin larvae arrive and begin trying to wrap Godzilla in silk. Naturally, this doesn't work out well. But before Godzilla can finish them, Mothra shields her children and is obliterated from a single hit. Even though one of the larvae got a direct hit right before this and is fine, but anything for the visual, I suppose. I mean, it's strong enough to flip Kiddo upside down, obliterate military equipment, damage a mech designed to fight him, and turned Mothra into nothing, but a fucking worm is only mildly hindered by it? Sure, movie, whatever you say. Yoshi gears up to fix Kiddo, but they run into some debris blocking their way. But rather than taking a detour, Yoshi gets on an abandoned dirt bike and rides down the stairs of a subway station to take the tunnels. It's actually kind of funny to think some rando had a fucking dirt bike in Tokyo, and that Yoshi is apparently very skilled at riding down the stairs and making jumps. How convenient that a vehicle designed for this very type of thing was just lying around. However, Yoshi gets rubble dropped on him from Godzilla smashing a larva that bit onto the end of his tail into the ground. Side note, why do these larvae ever go through metamorphosis? They're tougher than the adult form. Yoshi then loses his pack, but the fairies help him out by using their telekinesis to dig up his pack from the rubble. How they knew he was there is anyone's guess, but fuck it. Anyways, they lead him to Kiddo, and he gets to fixing him. However, Godzilla traps him inside when his atomic breath damages the hatch he entered in from. Despite this, Yoshi tells them he's out, fully knowing what might happen to him. After Kiddo and Godzilla engage into a death hug, Kiddo drills a hole into Godzilla's side, going for his chest that's still healing, and the film made it a point to notify us about this would make more sense, but that is a nitpick because right after, Kiddo blasts the wound with the hypermaser. Godzilla lets out a defiant roar, which for some reason makes Yoshi see Kiddo's memories. Sure, we'll go with that. And this makes Yoshi realize he was wrong all along, even though he wasn't. Godzilla gets wrapped up in silk, like in the original Godzilla vs. Mothra. Guys, it was humiliating then, and it's humiliating now. Granted, Godzilla was fighting for at least 5 hours straight, given that the final fight started at sunset, and it's just now sunrise, but the thought of Godzilla being done in by worms is embarrassing. But that is just my personal feelings. This is not an objective flaw with the writing, and like I mentioned, Godzilla is exhausted after a long fight and has sustained some serious wounds. So it makes sense why it would work. I just personally don't like it. What I really don't like, and is a flaw with the film, is the fairies spewing their nonsense.
Human beings should recognize their mistakes and correct them. It's the only way they can redeem themselves.
Keep this in mind. I'm not done with it yet. Before Godzilla can be killed, Kiddo takes control of itself and flies off towards the ocean with Yoshi still inside. Nuokane manages to shoot off the broken hatch before Kiddo does a barrel roll to help Yoshi escape. But before Yoshi lets go, Kiddo says goodbye as Douche ejects and catches him before Kiddo sinks himself back into the sea, finally getting the cold embrace of an eternal sleep that it wanted. Yoshi gives one final salute before the credits, and we have an after-credits scene of extracted Godzilla DNA being locked away. I'm guessing this was sequel bait for one that thankfully never happened. And that, everyone, brings us to the end of the plot summary. Time for conclusions. Godzilla Tokyo S.O.S. is certainly a mixed bag, but leans towards being bad. The plot hinges on you not watching the previous film. If Kiddo was such a huge problem for Mothra, then why wait 5 years? Was she not an adult yet? Couldn't the fairies simply go in her place then if that was the case? They seem to be all-knowing and can show up whenever the plot needs them, so why not tell them that building Kiddo is such a huge mistake in the 4 years it was being built, or within the 1 year between films? Well, then we wouldn't have a retarded theme now, would we? Speaking of, themes seem to be a common thing to use when defending bad writing. Granted, this is mainly done with recent films like The Last Jedi, but that doesn't stop it from being applied to older films like this. The idea of man shall not touch the souls of the dead is certainly a nice one, and could have been applied very well, but the film frames Kiddo's construction as one of hubris rather than desperation. Kiddo is not atomic bomb testing, and fuck the consequences. Kiddo is not dumping waste in the ocean, and fuck the consequences. Kiddo is a last-ditch effort to protect innocent lives from a living, breathing Armageddon. Never once in either film was the idea of using Kiddo as a weapon of war even hinted at. And the idea things that must live within the time nature allows is complete nonsense. Medical science has increased human life expectancy past what it once was. Does that mean we should stop with medical advances? What about people suffering from diseases like cancer? Should we let them die since it's a fatal if it is progressed to a certain point and it can't be stopped? It is a part of nature after all. The more you think about it, the less sense it makes. So when Mothra comes in and holds a gun to humanity's head, it makes her look like a moralizing asshole who thought a good time to do this was after Kiddo proved to be an effective weapon against Godzilla. Speaking of, Mothra as a replacement is honestly embarrassing, seeing how she proved more ineffective than the standard Maser cannons. This isn't the Heisei era Mothra which could possibly stand up to Godzilla. This is a Mothra whose ultimate attack does nothing and will render Mothra unable to fly. And unlike Kiddo, who has incredible durability and is capable of taking direct hits from Godzilla's atomic breath, and has survived being in the epicenter of its absolute zero cannon, Mothra is turned into nothing when she gets a direct hit. And it makes the Prime Minister look like an idiot for siding with Mothra. Everyone looks like an idiot for siding with her, especially considering that Godzilla isn't dead. He'll be gone for a while, but that silk and those cords won't hold forever, and then what? What if you do something that pisses Mothra off and she doesn't help you? Makes no sense. To get a bit positive here, the characters are the strongest part of this film. Don't get me wrong, though, they needed more time to breathe and develop, but what we got was serviceable. Yoshi especially. His love of machines takes priority over human interactions, as highlighted by Nuokane. And this lack of understanding is perhaps why he's initially against the idea of scrapping Kiddo. Machines are predictable, they can be fixed easily. But Kiddo is not your average machine. It can feel, it can think. And this is something that Yoshi has a hard time understanding until the end. Granted, the film doesn't offer much for this, but it's what I personally got out of it. The other characters were standard, but nothing too terrible in terms of writing. Well, except for the fact that no one bothers to actually think about what happens if they scrap Kiddo. Some of you may be thinking, it's just a giant monster movie. Stop thinking about it so much. Who cares about the plot? The point is just to watch Godzilla fight and the rest is filler. I'm sorry if I don't take this logic seriously, since yes, even in Godzilla movies, the plot and human characters matter. The human characters push the plot forward and in many cases are the reasons why the conflict even exists. If we don't care what happens to the characters, if the plot doesn't make sense, then what is the point of watching the film? Just wait until the fights are uploaded onto YouTube or just buy it on DVD and skip to the fights. This is the kind of logic that gives us shit like Bayformers and The Last Jedi and so many other horrible films. Well-written Godzilla movies exist, and they are the ones that often come up when discussing the best of the franchise. So please, stop perpetuating this retarded notion that Godzilla movies aren't supposed to be well written. You aren't helping the sorry state that most Western media is in currently. I used to hate this movie when I was younger, but now not so much. It certainly isn't good, but it isn't a train wreck like I once thought. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Click the relevant buttons, support me on Patreon if you can, and spread this video like the plague. See you guys next time.